Right. Who do you want to be your next Prime Minister? Good evening and welcome to the Great Hall of the University of Birmingham for the third and final prime ministerial debate of this election.
If you shrink the economy now, if you contract it, if you make the mistake of the 1930s, then you lose jobs, you lose growth, you lose businesses. We've got to support the recovery until it's fully established, and then my deficit reduction plan, which is a 4-year plan, comes into place. But take money out of the economy now, David, for ideological reasons, and you put the recovery at risk. And I do fear an emergency Tory budget in a few weeks' time, putting the very work that we've done to secure the recovery in jeopardy, and no other country in the world is prepared to do that now.
Nick Clegg, you have a chance to respond to what the others have said.
Well, I think one thing I would like to add is this, that and I think you're quite right in implying that none of the political parties have spelt out all the details. Some of them are simply not possible to spell out now, but clearly more work will need to be done. We've gone further than others, but clearly more will need to be done. But something which I think would make a huge difference to us all as we deal with these very difficult decisions about how to balance the books is for once to get the politicians actually working together on this. And I've suggested, and I don't know whether David Cameron and Gordon Brown want to take up that invitation, is that regardless of the outcome of the general election next week.
And we got into a situation where we ended up with the whole economy having to serve the banks rather than the other way around. I assume the banker that we were just being told about was probably Fred Goodwin, so-called Fred the Shred. It was actually this government that gave this man a knighthood for services to banking. He not only broke his own bank, he very nearly brought down the whole economy. So there are big, big lessons to learn, and I think the most important is that we put the Bank of England back in charge of regulating the banks and give them the specific duty of calling time on debt in the economy. Things got completely out of control. The banks were regulated, but badly and by the wrong organisation.
Once you've built a school and a hospital, as we've done in the last few years, you don't need to build it again. So we can have cuts in capital investment. Public sector pay will not rise as it did in previous years, and public sector pensions are being reformed. But I have to say one thing that is absolutely crucial to the time we're in at the moment, in this uncertain and dangerous world. David is proposing that there be cuts in public spending now, $6 billion, and that will shrink the economy at a time when we need to support the economy. We cannot afford to lose jobs and businesses and lose growth now. We must maintain the recovery and support it. And please let us not make the mistake of the 1930s and the 1980s and the 1990s.
So I don't think it's right to have tax credits going so far up the income scale. Why do we say not for the top 20% of recipients? You can then target tax credits for people who need it. And the other thing I would say about tax credits is this. I've now had enough people in tears in my constituency office where I'm an MP in Sheffield because they've been given money one moment, they've spent that money on their children, on the heating bills, and then suddenly they get a letter out of the blue from the government saying, you've got to pay that money back. That is so unfair on particularly single parents and single mothers for whom the tax credits are an absolute lifeline.
It is completely unacceptable what has happened, and we need to grip it very, very hard to sort this out for the future. The first thing we need to do is actually regulate these banks properly. We would put back to the Bank of England the power to regulate the banks, including having a big say over the appalling bonuses that have been paid. The next thing we need is a bank levy, and we say don't wait for the rest of the world, put that levy on now to start getting back the money from the banks that so many people have had to put in. We also want to see the banks lending again, particularly to small businesses, and so we need to make that happen.
Now, I believe in fairness, but one thing that I don't believe in is the Conservative policy which would cut child tax credits, but at the same time give an inheritance tax cut to the 3,000 richest people in the country of £200,000. Now, that's not fairness. That's the same old Conservative Party. Tax cuts for the very rich and cutting the child tax credits of the very poor is simply not fair.
David Cameron.
Well, you're absolutely right. The taxpayer has been having to pay more and more and more as the government has spent more and more and has been so careless at trying to stop wasting money. We see waste all around us and the government's done so little about it.
Well, we have set out in our manifesto, you can have a look at it in the back pages, we've set numbers, right there, specifying the savings that we do think should be made. We've set out in much greater detail than any other party, £15 billion worth of savings, which are a kind of upfront down payment to deal with this huge black hole we have in our public finances. What are we talking about? Things like scrapping the new generation of biometric passports, public sector pay restraint, saying that the top 20% of recipients of tax credits shouldn't receive those tax credits so they can be targeted elsewhere, shopping bills. And what I'm totally with you on this, Adina. I think it's just wrong that, let's say you're, a teaching assistant on £10,000 a year. At the moment, you will pay, let's say you work, maybe 3 days a week, you will pay about £1,000 of that in tax and national insurance. Under our plan, by lifting the income tax threshold to £10,000, you won't pay any income tax on that first £10,000. I believe that if people work hard, particularly if they want to get off benefits and start working, even if it's just part-time, we should help them keep more of their money. It is as simple as that. That is the fair thing to do.
David Cameron.
People can remember the record of 13 years. They remember who it was who abolished the 10p tax that hit some of the poorest people in the country the hardest. They remember the measly 75p increase on pensioners that Gordon Brown was responsible for. And let me say this, the whole reason we're having this debate about how difficult it is to get taxes down, how difficult it's going to be to cut spending, is because this Prime Minister and this government have left our economy in such a complete mess, with a budget deficit that this year is forecast to be bigger than that of Greece. That's why we're having to